right now on Higher Journeys Radio with Alexis Brooks. We are living at a time when racial division seems to be at a fever pitch. And for that reason, I had to think carefully before tackling the subject that you are about to hear. But this isn't about the human race. Rather, this is a discussion about extraterrestrials and race. We're talking about black ETs, or as my guest Barry Littleton refers to them, melanin-dominant extraterrestrials. According to Barry, there are hybrid ETs that encompass the spectrum of color, including African-like alien beings. And though this isn't or shouldn't be a sticking point to the larger context of the reality of ETs, it is one that certainly should be part of the broader discussion when it comes to the ET and UFO phenomenon. So who are these so-called melanin-dominant beings? Where do they come from? And how involved are they among our own race? Barry shares his perspective both as a researcher and a contactee in quite a unique way. Take a listen. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Barry, because your genuine interest in the subject that we loosely refer to as the ET and UFO phenomenon is ever evolving. You've been quite vocal about your own sojourns as an experiencer, and of course we had a chance to talk in detail about this part of your life back in October of last year. But you've also become increasingly vocal about what you refer to as melanin-dominant extraterrestrials, or more colloquially, we'll say black extraterrestrials. Now, I'm going to add to that by calling them BET. And I'm not talking about black entertainment television, folks. Listen, these beings that you're exploring, I guess would be considered hybrid in nature, if I'm correct. Some may even be coming from our future. This is an exciting topic, and I know you've been talking about it for a good while. So let's start by, if you could, give us an overview of what you've learned about BETs, black extraterrestrials.
How you doing? No, thank you very much for having me on.
Always love to have you.
Thank you. I'll tell you, well, there's a few different things to come from aspects, especially this would be, especially what we've learned, what we can find out, not just ethnically and ancestrally, but also by current contactees you have that have come in contact with some of these beings. And I think that that's not been, emphasized enough probably in the mainstream at all. But some of these beings, for fine example, for just the local galaxy we have here, our Milky Way, we've got beings that come from, there's a constellation of Centaurus. There's supposed to be melanin-dominant people there. There's a gentleman, Michael Desmarquet, that talked about a race of beings there at Centaurus called the Bacterianians that are also more androgynous. But he also talked about melanin-dominant species there. Mm-hmm. So that's one example, okay? Another one would be Andromeda. Mm-hmm. I have a friend that actually threw a melanin-dominant contactee conference about a year ago.
I remember you telling me about that, right?
Yeah, and she's said the contactee that the beings that came to her were these dreadlock black women from Andromeda that are more of the Amazon type, all right, and that they are actually represented in entertainment quite a bit. And that would be actually not just Wonder Woman, but when you look at things like Guinan on Star Trek The Next Generation, she still had the dreads. Okay, you've got Michonne on The Walking Dead. She's got the dreads. And these black women show up occasionally showing in our entertainment. So that's another deal there. Something else, I think. Oh, sorry.
No. You're already pouring in so much. No surprise. I want to go back to that for a minute. You're talking about individuals. Again, we're speaking of human ET hybrids, correct? Let's try to get clear on that. We're talking about corporeal beings, of course. So we're not talking necessarily about interdimensional. So if we are, you're saying that some of these beings are represented in our medias and our entertainment. So that would assume that there are some of us who are creating these medias that are aware of these individuals, yes? That are aware of, yes. Okay? What have you learned there?
Absolutely. Well, you've got others, like even the X-Men, you've got Storm, and you've got these other melanin-dominant females that are being seen on television right now quite a bit. So I think that's representative of not just how we're seeing so much the equality of the feminine coming in right now. But
Mm-hmm.
also we're just seeing that incorporation, it's always been there, even to where the dreadlock thing that I'm seeing, they're trying to connect that to the Predator in those movies, how they have those dreadlocks, and so they're throwing it off by putting an insectoid reptilian face on it, but really they're supposed to represent these Andromedan women. So that's it. Does that answer your question a little bit? How they're incorporated in, or what you just kind of asked me?
Well, I think what I'm getting at, or what I'm trying to find out, is how are those who are creating these characters becoming aware that they exist to begin with? I mean, obviously, there's a big conversation
Oh,
about, movies that are made, not all, but certainly some are films that are made, including television programming, that is designed to, I don't know if it's acclimate, but to expose the fact that this is real. If this
uh,
is the case, because you're basically making a correlation between some of these characters in our media and the actuality that these melanin dominant, particularly women, exist, how do you think individuals that are creating this media are learning that they actually exist?
I think a lot of times just they're probably contactees themselves, or in a situation like Gene Roddenberry, long before the first Star Trek, he was involved in a channeling sessions with the beings that were written and talked about in the book, The Only Plan of Choice. So he was involved in things like this, so we're dealing with these concepts long before the original Star Trek came out.
Oh, sure. Well, that's well known. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So, but I think that you've got the same situation here. Like even taking that down to somebody like, I believe her name is Sophia Stewart, that wrote the Terminator and also the Matrix.
The,
She
the
wrote,
black
yes, yeah.
female.
I think she might be a contactee also, and that's where a lot of that information is coming from.
Right. For those.
Yeah, and people that have access. 'Cause it's so hard to get access to knowledge about melanin dominant extraterrestrials or just our history in general. It's everything's so fragmented, and
Sure.
that it's just difficult to begin with. But I think a lot of times it may be coming from source or ancestral knowledge.
Right. For those that don't know who Sophia Stewart is, and I'll be frank, I didn't know until you mentioned The Matrix. This is a young woman, still young woman, African American woman who I believe won a lawsuit a while back. She had sued the twins that alleged to have made The Matrix, saying that she was the original writer of the Matrix. I don't know too much about it, but it's interesting that you bring it up in this context. Well, let's talk about this. There's a lot of ground to cover here, and I mean, this is a subject that has not. I think you're kind of on the forefront when it comes to the idea that there are such a thing as melanin dominant extraterrestrial beings. But it is gaining momentum. There was a little segment that you did, I don't know, about a month or so ago, a recent chat that you had with Corey Goode, along with Peter Maxwell Slattery, excuse me, while you were over at James Gilliland's East City Ranch. And in this chat, you discussed that some of these beings, you said this, have coming from constellations including Centaurus, Andromeda, and Vega. But the other thing, I don't know if it was Corey that mentioned this or you, but making a correlation, no pun intended, with the Zulu tribe in South Africa, the Zulu tribes. I believe he said that some of these black extraterrestrials resembled the Zulus in very, very tall, but they sort of resembled the tribe. And it made me think of, are you familiar with Credo Mutwa?
Yes, very
Okay,
much so.
who's hitting close to 100 years at this point. He's still hanging in South Africa. But there was some interesting, even though there wasn't too much said about that in this particular talk that I saw of yours, immediately made me think of the Zulu, Credo Mutwa, obviously his interaction with a variety of species, and a lot of the tumult that has gone on within the tribe having to do with other species. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, let's bring Credo into this.
Oh, okay. Well, interestingly enough, I have long since heard that described, and before Norman Bergen got well known for speaking of the brothers that got off the spaceship. All right, that there were these brothers that, and I know I've talked to people now who've come in contact with them that sometimes dress similar to like almost Moors, but they're often these very tall brothers, over 7 feet tall. And I've heard them coming from not just Andromedan, but also from the Triangulum galaxy. I mean,
Yes.
we could go back further into a cycle before the one we're familiar with now, where there were actually much more giant individuals on this planet that is being covered right now, and they were also melanin dominant. But that takes us to the Triangulum galaxy, so we start having extragalactic contact. And something else I wanted to throw in there also because I forgot to mention it. Um, as far as the Pleiadians go,
Hmm.
so often we see the Pleiadians, and I'll be honest. I said some things earlier. I cracked some jokes about. I found it very distressing at first when all the Pleiadians were always represented as looking like Fabio, Christy Brinkley on National Lampoon, or maybe Kevin Sorbo as Hercules. That's what they all looked like. But in reality, right now, you've got Aboriginal elders that
That's
have come.
right. That's
Yeah,
I'm very familiar. Well, specifically the Anangu tribe. As a matter of fact, I was with them last year or earlier
oh
this year.
wow.
Absolutely. Well, Uluru, I've talked about it many times because I lectured there in January, is directly associated with the Palladian, with the Pleiades, and so are particularly the Anangu tribe of the Aboriginal people. So I'm very familiar with that. Absolutely. We can look at their features. In fact, let's
Uh-huh.
talk about. This is what's interesting to me, Barry. This is, by the way, this is more of a roundtable than a typical interviewer. So bear with us, folks. This is what happens when Barry and I get together. It's just kind of a evolving conversation. But I'm so glad that you brought that up. The appearance of. Let's talk about this idea, if it exists, that hybrids are among us. I have a sense that they very well may be. And some of those hybrids would include people like the Zulus, some of them, and the Aboriginals. What are some of the features that would stand out to you that might hint that there's something else going on? Hi, this is Alexis Brooks from Higher Journeys. I am so delighted to once again be a part of Australia's most respected consciousness event, the amazing Cosmic Consciousness Conference in Uluru, Australia. I'd love for you to join me for what promises to be a spectacular experience located in Australia's spiritual heartland, also known as the solar plexus chakra of the planet. I've experienced that amazing energy firsthand, and I know that this is a place of high vibration. And this is where the Cosmic Consciousness Conference all takes place, set at the beautiful Ayers Rock Resort, featuring world-class speakers from around the globe, including Tracy Ash, Mary Rodwell, Rebecca Hardcastle Wright, Barry Eaton, Christine Day, and Martin Kenny, among other fascinating presenters. But that's not all. The activities kicking off the Cosmic Consciousness Conference at Uluru feature an exclusive tour from Ayers Rock Resort to Curtin Springs, a visit to the sacred site of Cave Hill, a reception featuring the rarely seen Aboriginal Anangu's Inma welcome dance, and then the conference commences. In January of 2020, we will experience a major reset of the planet, and Uluru will be the place to be during this rare and unprecedented event. So, will you join me? Now's the time to make that long-awaited trip to Australia a reality. Visit cosmicconsciousness.com.au to learn more and make your arrangements now to be a part of Earth history at Uluru. I look forward to seeing you at Cosmic Consciousness 2020.
One
Physical
would be
features.
one would be the height. Another thing, and I've come into contact with these beings that are humanoid, but I call them charters that tend to come about every 7 years, and I think they come around for a lot of people that are like lifetime contactees.
Mm-hmm.
So about every 7 years, you might meet an individual in a store, in a library or airport that says something phenomenal to you that kind of triggers your consciousness. Anyway, something I recognized about them, if you can sense the energy, their
Mm-hmm.
energy is much different, more advanced, but physically there doesn't seem anything really different with them, except for one thing I noticed is their eyes are literally a normal little bigger. Okay, and then also the ear, how we have the bottom lobe of the ear is rather pronounced for us when we put our earrings and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. They kind of tend to not have much of that. It tends to go more just into the side. I mean, not completely, but it just is a little bit was noticeable to me. So I think that would be something that would maybe. And I met a melanin dominant woman that I think was connected to that. And some of these Andromedan lineages we just spoke of are connected genetically to the Mayans, and that's what they claim, and that's what they told my friend that's in connection with them, that
Mm-hmm.
they're connected. They were connected to the Mayan lineage. So that
Mm-hmm.
anyway, sorry, but that going back, that's one of the things there that would kind of stand off. And if you're somebody that can really sense energy,
I was just going to say, yes.
you'll find that some of these beings, they feel like they have this energy that pushes us. It's a little more advanced than what we're used to when we just communicate with another person,
No question.
even an advanced person.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also the thing to look forward to is I look towards and check for telepathy. Do you get telepathy off these individuals?
Mm-hmm.
Are they capable of such?
That seems to be a common. I'm sorry.
I'll say we have to explore our consciousness a little bit with dealing with it,
Right. Well, you're so tuned in, Barry, to those things, those subtleties, but very powerful connections that absolutely. And I agree with you. I do think that, well, first of all, I think we're all hardwired to this energy field, to the field. And when we are in the midst, if we're aware and we're in the midst of somebody like this, there is something that can't quite be explained in words, but something within the energy field that you pick up on. Telepathy, that's an interesting thing. But certainly just, go ahead.
No, I was saying, can we bat something around?
Yeah.
I like you because you're really intelligent. You follow on all this, I know. So check it out. This just goes a little bit forward because you mentioned hybrids a little bit. We talked about that. We didn't get into that too much. Something when dealing with melanin dominant civilizations or beings, we also have to look at those that might come from dark matter.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you mention that.
And there's something on Earth right now called radiotropic fungus that was found on the walls of Fukushima and of Chernobyl. That grows in there. It's that black fungus that is actually taking the gamma radiation and converting it into the energetic growth cycle. Have you ever heard of that?
I have not. No, not at all.
Yeah.
Explain more. Tell us more.
Yeah, radiotropic fungus. Anyway, so there was even theories that I think it was Keish and some others were saying that maybe that could be used for radiation cleanup. Now, I've heard other scientists saying things that I found fascinating. They were saying that they think that there's a possibility that this fungus was actually sent here from a type 3, type 4 civilization to help us combat the radiation on the planet.
Isn't that interesting?
Now, and when we start thinking about we never get help in things, we always say that no one's helping us. But, we start dealing with civilizations that are type 3 or type 4 that are actually getting their prime source of energy is from the wormhole itself, from space itself. That's taken us to a whole other deal because they're also going into what isn't just the micro and the nano, it's going into the pico. We start thinking about pico technology and what really a Dyson sphere would be, a civilization that can make an engineering structure around its star and the planets and its solar system. Okay, what would it be like for beings that are on the pico in there?
Mm-hmm.
They would be so much going inner space like Martin Short, man. It'd be a whole other thing.
Right.
They'd be contacting us through inner space opposed to extra solar things.
Right. That certainly would denote a type way beyond type 1 because it's all about self-sustainability, isn't it? And what you're talking about with this name this again in terms of really reverse engineering the damaging effects, not just mitigating the effects of Fukushima, but really transmuting them is what it sounds like, what this fungus is doing. Is that what I'm hearing? That
Yes.
It's taking what was considered a obviously toxic, beyond toxic substance that is still very much alive, but reversing it and transmuting it, composting it even, so that it's not only not good for us, it could actually work in our favor. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty amazing when you look at it. I mean, anything that as far as science fiction, it's like only the Hulk does that. The Hulk feeds on gamma radiation. It gets bigger, but that's what this thing actually is doing. This fungus is doing, and I think that I've tried to stress a lot how much fungus is connected with the contact experience, especially with mine. Some of the ships I've been aboard had a fungus, a mushroom type of texture on the inside, although it was harder than the fungus we're familiar with. But I know that's part of what the compound is, that they have a fungus they're mixing in with like the DNA of the crew and also certain metals that are refined from planets that are devoid of Van Allen belts and atmospheres. they take a cosmic radiation bombardment that's unlike any metals here on Earth. So you get that compound, and that's kind of how they're grown over a wormhole. But that's going left. But
And
anyway,
but hold on for a second. I want to see if I'm getting an image here. You're saying that in some of your experiences of being on craft, that you literally saw this fungus sort of attached or tethered to the walls of the inside of the structure of the craft itself.
no, it was more like okay. We call them around where I live toadstools, like
Mm-hmm.
mushrooms, the
Yes.
toadstools. But you ever see how they look on the top? The,
Yeah.
the, the, the walls were quite similar to that. The only difference would be when you touch it, it had a harder consistency than if you touched a toadstool here. You know what I mean? But it was a quite similar texture to that let me know immediately it was organic to a certain degree.
And alive, no
Yes,
doubt.
very much so. Very much so.
Here's why I want to bring this up. Okay, this is going all over the place, but I always say, what did we say, Barry, before we got on air? Dear source, let this go where it needs to go. So here we go. Here's what's occurred to me. Now, I know we're sort of digressing from the melanin dominant, and yet not. All of it's related, but I want to bring this aspect in. We have heard so many times, Barry, individuals who have talked about their interaction with craft as almost as if the craft itself were conscious. Never mind the occupants as we understand. We think of craft, something has to be driving the craft, but others have sort of argued that it could be the craft itself that is organic, is conscious, is in communication. Now you're bringing in this idea that this, let's call it fungus, is another name for it, that is part of the architecture of the craft, which is conscious. I'm wondering if at some level individuals that are describing their interactions with craft in this way, experiencing that you just described. Am I making sense?
Yes, yes, it's very possible because there's could be a type of symbiosis that goes on.
Well,
Like,
sure. But
yeah,
but
oh, go,
but
sorry.
but what I'm saying is the as you described this material that's organic, that is a part of the craft. And then I said, well, it would seem that if it's organic, it has some measure of consciousness to it. If you follow that line of thinking, when individuals are coming in contact with craft, could they be experiencing, could that element inside the craft be part of what they're experiencing as being in contact with it?
Yes, yes. Now that okay, that's will take us to another level. That contact that you're talking about when being within the craft, and I think there's a major scientific problem is that the outside and inside of the craft are not in the same dimension. So when you're
Mm.
in contact with this craft and you're inside of it physically, like I was, it creates this thing that they call temporal aphasia,
You talked about
which
that
is this
before.
sickness that comes in. It's it almost interferes with the contact experience itself. It's hard to breathe in there. There's a mist all over the place. It's hard to breathe, but then there's this feeling of being just completely disoriented. Like when you're going down on a roller coaster, you're losing your stomach and it doesn't stop. Kind of maybe double that, and it starts making you debilitated at a certain point.
Hmm.
So that's one there, but that's part in being in contact with the ship itself, what I believe. And even though it is alive, and something else that I've always tried to deal with, Alexis, is that um, these rooms sometimes they move around you, and that means like to a point of where you almost want to go somewhere in the craft, and suddenly you're there, or you see something that looks like a little window, and you look close in there, and all of a sudden, boom, you're in another room,
Hmm.
and then the temporal aphasia gets even worse at that point. So I think that says really a lot what it's like to be on board a multidimensional ship. But in that way, is it also like when you're moving around in there, like you're being digested to a certain degree? You're being moving around inside of a living organism.
Hmm.
See what I'm saying? I mean, it's just food for thought, if nothing else.
Oh, it most certainly is. It's just so interesting, though, because I recall you talked about temporal aphasia when you were last on the show, and I don't know whether there are others that are. I would imagine others are having the experience, but maybe describing it differently. Have you run into other people who are, I call them experiencers, you call them contactees, that have described something similar, but maybe called it something else?
Um, a few, a few. I mean, it seemed to be not. prevalent because a lot of people you'll find will have these astral and dream type of bilocations to craft. I've seen
Non-physical,
that
yeah.
myself. I've been there physically, and I'm getting sick and suffering from that. But I've seen some other people there, like touching an engine, and they were partially phased out. So I know they were like in their dream body or astral. But guess what? The physical perimeters don't extend to the physical body like it does to the dream body. So they weren't suffering from that aphasia like I was. So I think that's why a lot of people will have these astral type of experience and contact experiences in that way. So does that answer a little bit? I
Well,
mean,
sure. I mean, every little thing brings us a little further down the rabbit hole. This is bringing me back to the part of the conversation where we were talking about physical versus non-physical contact. Yours seems to be very curiously physical. Well, you said you've had both physical and from the astral and the dream body. But why do you think now we're taking a step further away from, we're going to bring it back to the melanin dominant ETs.
you got it.
But why do you think, Barry, that yours and some people like you have had these physical excursions where you're experiencing the temporal aphasia? Why?
You know, well, for starters, when I was younger, I had like kind of both type of experiences, but there was one that happened that really crossed over into where it was definitely real and it was physical, but I mean, it was interfering with my normal daily life. I called it the acid rain experience. But anyway, so at that point, I started asking and trying to conjure up more physical experiences like that. And
Okay.
all of them to be physical. And I tried everything. That's when ET came out too. That guy was putting together shortwave radios. I tried everything. I tried the telepathy, and I asked for it to be more physical. I mean, I had some plans. I was like, okay, I'm going to grab a piece of technology or something, and I'll be able to prove that this.
Wow.
I mean, but that it didn't work quite like that. But that's why mine had definitely turned even more physical, and that's from going what I call childhood experiences onto adult onset experiences. Because the age of about 13 to 18, I didn't have any experiences. They stopped. And at 18, they started again. About 18 and a half. And they got real physical then, a lot of missing time. And somebody else was with me a couple of times. And they saw these craft and they're missing time. And it really changes because, that type of delusion is not shared.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
You talked about that in our last show. And by the way, folks, I'm going to make sure that we have a link to, I think it was a 2-part show that we did that was chock full of great stuff in terms of your experiences. And, as I listen to you, Barry, you talk about intelligence, never mind me, man, you got it going on. And it's not just about intelligence. You are so inquisitive. That drives you to really peel back the layers and understand this technology as associated with the contact experience in a way that I've never heard described this way before. And I'm wondering, let's see if we can segue back to the beings themselves, including those that we call melanin dominant or loosely black ETs. It would seem that someone with your level of inquisition or being inquisitive, they know that. And it could be that you are being utilized. I'm not going to say used, but utilized as a conduit to really translate, understand, break down what's happening so that it can be shared with people like our audience. I have a feeling that there is a contingent of non-human intelligence that understands how intricate your brain is and is putting these experiences in front of you, including the physical contact versus non-physical, including having the experience of temporal aphasia, in order to translate it in your human terms to be able to share it with others. There's something going on there.
Oh, well, thank you. I used to wonder because every time all this crazy stuff happened, especially, when I was younger, and I would think, why in the HE double hockey sticks is this happening to me? You know what I mean? And why? I mean, these are things that were completely stopping my perception to where it makes it hard to even function in your normal daily life.
I get that.
So, but I see now that's a part of this whole, when we talk about, this conscious, this shift, I think that's what it is. It's a conscious shift.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people are becoming aware, and that's what's going to change things here, I believe. Maybe change this from being a prison type of planet situation to something that is more like a school or, something a little that's what's changing here. I think it's also humanity's best chance for going forward. And for me, okay, when this stuff happens, when you're in the presence of a non-human, I mean, it's like I'm brand new every time, okay? Every time this would happen. But the fact that they are sometimes telepathically answering your questions before you can formulate them in your mind is somewhat invasive, okay? It's also awing, and it generates, I need something to prove what I was saying. I like science, and they're not making me do anything. They're not experimenting on me so I can move around on these ships, but I'm so sick I'm not much of a threat to anybody.
Don't stop it.
I mean, seriously, I'm suffering from that so bad. I mean, I'm not much of a threat at all, but I
Wow.
like technology, so I would look at it, and I try to use the science to help validate what I was experiencing. You know what I mean? Trying to keep some type of a baseline for what I was experiencing. I just found that science did it. I like the technology, and I can observe it. I was allowed to touch some of it, so that, made it. Does that answer that a little bit? And I find that so many people now, as I start communicating more, like one of these conferences, it's the attendees. You've got the biggest, experiencers / contactees, whatever we call them, but there's so many in the audience.
No question about it. Oh, no question.
They can't
Yes.
come. And last time you and I talked and did one of these, we had mentioned just at the end that there's about, I believe, like 90% of our population has contact. A lot of it happens on the superconscious level, the subconscious level, and they start having these dreams. I just did a thing. I think was to lead into what you want to talk about later. A thing about the video game craze. How I think it's kind of blocking the clairvoyance in young people, and also contactee experiencer type of stuff with young people right now. It's a major problem. You got these games that are so virtual reality. They're shooting people. They're blowing people's brains up. You can see this visually on these games. I was so much shocked. I come from I'm from the Atari era, the original Nintendo. We didn't have anything like what you're seeing now.
Yeah.
And I think that's bleeding over into our society right now with these mass shootings and the horrible things that are going on. I mean, they can do that in virtual reality. They can do it live stream right now.
Sure.
So that it's giving a loss for human life to a degree.
Right.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Let's go back to the melanin.
Ooh, wow. You took a real big left there. Okay, let's try to keep this tight. U-turn now. Let's U-turn back for a minute. You said a lot there, but I think if I were to distill, Barry, what you were saying is, we call it the big D word, right? Distraction. Distraction not from the fact that this phenomenon is real and exists, but distraction from the fact that we are of this phenomenon. You touched on contact being a mass phenomenon. Everybody knows at this point, this is what I lectured on in Australia. Are we unconscious experiencers? Are we experiencers and are not aware of it? Now you're going into the possible why. What are these deterrents that are coming in that are causing us to forget or put screen memory or, a whole bunch of other deterrents that would make us completely oblivious to the fact that we're having these very, very deep and visceral experiences. So just to kind of bring it back, I think that's where you were going there. So, well, listen, let's talk. I'm going to look at the clock here. We got about another 15 minutes left to go. Always goes fast with you, my friend. While I was in the UK, let's bring this back to the melanin dominant ETs, because I think that's
sorry
still
about that.
no, do not apologize one bit. This has all been fabulous. I was over in the UK a couple of weeks ago, as you know, for the Awakening UFO Expo, and I'll tell you, I recall seeing a young girl who was of African descent. I can't say African American because we were in the UK. I'm assuming she was from there, maybe Afro-Caribbean. And although I didn't have a chance to speak with her, Barry, I saw her, there are a couple thousand people there, a good amount of people, but I saw her on several occasions throughout the weekend. And there was something distinctly different about her, not just her appearance. We talked about energy. There was an energy field around her that I picked up on. And she was constantly smiling. I noticed, let me see if I can describe her. She's, I would say probably a teenager, certainly not 20, young woman. She was walking with two individuals who were Caucasian. I don't know if those were her parents, adopted. I don't know, but she seemed to be accompanied by them. But there was something about her stance. Her neck was extremely long, and she had sort of a look on her face of almost a look of peace and contentment. Hard to pinpoint. I really wanted to speak with her because I felt so strongly that something was different. Something different was going on with her. Have you run into people like that? I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think that there was something extraterrestrial about this young woman, and wouldn't be a surprise at a conference like this. We just talked about that. Yeah.
So check this out.
Yeah.
This out. So my understanding is we talked about kind of the black dark energy thing, dark matter, but also my understanding is that we also have another type of praying mantis that comes from dark matter. So we've got the black praying mantis. And my understanding is that they have done a hybrid project with humanoids that are these, melanin dominant individuals who have, normally they could be a little tall, but they're supposed to have an extra joint between the wrist and the elbow, and an extra joint between like the knee and the ankle. And they are able, their necks are a little longer, and sometimes they have these triangles on their foreheads, but they're also known to do this dance. It's like a very long, when they say hello, they do like some dance that's like several hours or something, a dance they do in front of people. And what people try to do is mimic, which is very hard because we don't have we can't do the movements. But that is my understanding. When you're talking about this individual, that's kind of what I'm picking up, is maybe this might be one of these descendants of that type of a hybrid, that is one of these mantis hybrid beings somehow. It almost sounds that way to me.
Yeah, well, I have to say, again, I so wanted. No, I was co-hosting this event, so I was constantly back and forth to the stage and introducing speakers. So I didn't have a chance. If I had more time, I would have not hunted her down. I don't want to use that. I would have looked for her, and I would have looked for a reason to engage her in conversation. Barry, there was something about, let's say, her entire stance. It was very erect, extraordinarily erect, and she held her head in a certain, I'm kind of mimicking it right now as I'm talking to you, held her head very high, not with a pretense about her, but just this was her posture. And I recall her neck being very long, and even the way she moved her head was different. Mm-hmm. We'll never know. If you're listening, or the people that were with her are listening to this show, and you know who I'm talking about, I would love to hear from you.
You know, something else I think worth saying that I had to come to terms with when I was younger. I had an individual that would come around every so often when I was about 7, just every so often, and he'd play with me for just a little bit, and he'd have to take off when other people would come around, you know? But he was even seen by a couple other people. But he looked to be like a kid wearing these ridiculous kind of kitty cats, those old, like, 60s glasses, the kitty cats, with the bald cap. And, you know, and then I later on saw this individual on a craft, and he's wearing a uniform, and he looks like an insect. But it's still him, and I still recognized it as being him. And I'm like, what was he doing to my optical nerves and everyone else that we didn't fully see him like what he appeared to be? I think it says a lot about mimicry and about virtual reality scenario technology, just consciousness in that way. Mm-hmm. So what you were seeing, it's hard to know what we're seeing, but you're seeing something that, you know, you picked up something extraterrestrial there. That's the same way as when I come in contact with a real contactee, I sense something that, I stole the Doctor Who term, Artron energy. Mm-hmm. But I think when you're around these non-human intelligences, that some of them themselves are part of these ships. They're part of them that are grown around these micro wormholes. So that's a singularity. And once you get around the technology that's dealing with that, or the beings that are, I think it irradiates the cells of our body, and you start giving off a certain energetic frequency. And I can pick it up on other contactees. Mm-hmm. When I get with them or when I shake hands with them or something, I know. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it's been very interesting. So I don't know. I think there's just something about that energy that comes through also. So it's twofold. That, and you picked up a non-human intelligence coming up as an individual, both by body movement and consciously.
No
I think
question.
I
Yeah.
think that's huge because Dr. Delbert Blair, if you remember who that is, he had actually said he was a contactee, and he said that he went to George Adamski convention, and he got approached by two melanin dominant individuals telepathically, walked up to him and told him they were from like Alpha Centauri and were really just blowing him up with information. But they approached him at a conference. I think that's a much more realistic scenario that we want to give it credit for.
Mm-hmm. Well, within our community, it's certainly been talked about readily. And there's still just such an X factor, Barry, on all of this. So many questions. I so hope that there's one day even just a little bit more clarity as to what we're dealing with. Because now you mentioned something a while back, and I've said this many times, and I believe it to be so, that there is indeed a symbiotic relationship somehow that is going on between us and that which we are talking about. Maybe there are aspects of us and vice versa, but there is a connection. I always say we have skin in the game here. So listen, we only have a few. We have skin in the game, but we only have a few minutes left. I want to bring our focus up for a few minutes to the people of color right here on this planet, and their lack of participation, at least openly, in these discussions. I think we're making a little headway, but we're still missing in action. We're still MIA, too much so. And we've both obviously been approached with this as a talking point with others who have engaged us in this conversation. And I know we even discussed this somewhat briefly in our last chat on air, but let's go there again for a little bit. Barry, from your perspective, are we starting to see the veil of sorts lift on this? Meaning, are people of color starting to get more involved, come out of the closet, if you will, and to discuss these topics from your perspective? I mean, we know full well that the contact phenomenon, if it's happening at all, and we certainly feel that it is a pervasive phenomenon, and no one is fully precluded from interfacing with this. So give me your thoughts on all of this.
As I've been around just a few years now, but I'm seeing it starting to change because a few of us are coming forward. We've got so many things, so many different, whether it be religions or the fear of being termed as insane or whatever. We don't want to talk about this, and our culture has been specifically quiet about it. But I think that's starting to change a lot now because we're going forward, and if we're going to become truly a Type 1 civilization, we have to get past some of these prejudices we have going on right now. And I'm starting to see that change a little bit. Like example, like a lot of times when I'll bring this up at one of the conferences, and I don't try to harp on it too much. I'm not forcing it on people, but they have to be aware that there are very few melanin dominant people there.
Sure.
So that's something to be aware of, or that very few of the extraterrestrials being presented are melanin dominant, black or ethnic at all, and that really detours those of us that are having experiences. I found it a very much deterrent for myself before I ever came forward. As a child, especially, I didn't see anybody that looked like me having that. So the fact that there's a few of us doing it now, more coming to the conferences, it's only going to grow. Because I found a lot of the attendees have been very kind and very accepting, but they come to say the same. I hear this a lot. Wow, I never thought of that. I don't see many black people here. I never thought about that. So then they started talking to people. It changes it. There was more melanin dominant people when I was at the last conference than I'd seen there ever before. It was quite delightful, to be honest with you.
That's
so
great.
I hope that just keeps increasing.
Yeah. I think it is too. I do. I was just anxious to get your feelings on it. And again, I think like anything, when we put a question out there, I always say it's not this or that, it's this and that. There's so many different elements to the why of what we're not seeing, what we are seeing. But let's, like you said, I'm going to agree with you. If we are to become a Type 1 and beyond civilization, we must get past this. And certainly with what's going on, it seems to completely divide our society now. Again, we're talking about yet another pair of incidents that appear to be racially charged incidents, both in Texas and Ohio. We're still far too concerned with race and other differences within our own species. And I think it would also do us good to consider that beings that are outside of Homo sapiens sapiens at all, as we understand it, those are who are so far evolved that there is no color, there is no one gender at this level, they are androgynous. This is something we must eventually get our arms around, right?
Yes, definitely.
So,
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it starts by, just getting starting to really get to know one another, getting to know other cultures, really good exchange.
Absolutely.
More of that. And I think maybe the internet communication is helping with that a bit.
I think so. There's some good things going on. We're going to end on that. There are great things going on. I always say this is dichotomous times that we're living in. The best of the best and the worst of the worst are kind of shaking hands, and maybe we'll create a third reality and get rid of polarity altogether. Wouldn't that be a great thing?
Definitely.
Oh, dude, it's always great to have you. We're going to have to close it down, but I want to encourage everyone to visit Barry Littleton's excellent and ever expanding YouTube channel, which is simply listed under his name, right? Barry Littleton. That's it,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
No,
So
no handles.
we'll make sure to have a link that will directly lead you there. And as always, you know what's coming next, right, Journeyers? If you enjoyed this episode, and particularly if you know someone that might resonate with some of what you heard today from Barry, I urge you to like and share this content with your circle of friends and family. And of course, if you enjoy Higher Journeys, I invite you to subscribe to our channel for brand new shows each and every week, along with Barry's. So, Mr. Littleton, thank you, dude. Keep up the great work. And don't hang up, because we're going to chat for a few minutes after we get on the air. But I just want to thank you, as always, for bringing your brilliance and your genuineness to such a big subject. You're appreciated. I want you to know that.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate you.
And as always, we appreciate you, Journeyers. We'll talk to you next time on Higher Journeys. Take care.